I find it really fascinating to see consumers who have, dedicate themselves to Starbucks. And if you're one of those, my power to you. Starbucks is one of the great names of all time. But when we're in class, we'll start talking about the service supplied is less than the service demanded, or the original marketing promise that Starbucks brought is unfortunately not what consumers are looking for right now. So I'll want to bring that on later, but I just want you to get an idea of where the conversation is going. So chapter one was about the basic definitions of what channels is. Chapter two was about how we go about segmenting our consumer groups by channel. And then this chapter is going to be how do we go about determining whether our particular marketing channel is efficient or not. And so, chapter three is about auditing marketing channels. When I say auditing marketing channels, it's important to note that I'm talking about auditing existing channels. You can't audit a channel, of course, that doesn't exist. And so that's kind of what we're talking about. And why do we do that? Well, auditing being the next step, if we're going to add value in our market segmentation, we need to know where we are. And so in auditing, which is the next step, the first step that we want to do is we want to identify the target segments in what we were doing from chapter two, and then we want to audit the existing ones, and auditing is the next step. So what you try to do is you audit the existing channels, you evaluate each channel member's capability to provide the service outputs that we wish to give efficiently. And then hopefully what the auditing does is it identifies which functions get performed by each channel member in the existing system, by whom, what levels, and at what cost. And when we audit the marketing channels, what we're doing is we're talking about each channel member and the contributions that they bring. The evaluation needs to include the level and also the cost of the service outputs by each of the channel members. And so remember that our channel functions are basically the activities that produce the service outputs. And so the service outputs, such as breaking bulk, the service outputs as varieties, each one of those is built up of the activities that are produced in the service outputs that are demanded by end users. Okay, so the service outputs are the six. The channel functions is that very busy slide we saw in the very first chapter. And I told you we were going to visit them. Well, guess what? We're going to visit them. So, what are the benefits of auditing? You could put a number one, two, and a three by each one of these. And so, the benefits of the auditing, the first one is that you diagnose and remedy shortcomings in either the provisions or the price of the service outputs to each of the target segments. Now, that's a very heavy wordsmith. What does it all mean? Okay. So, the process of diagnosis means to take apart. That's what diagnosis means. And so, when I take something apart, what I do is that I look at each individual little piece and see how it all fits together. And in the case of channel functions, it would be like who does the billing? How is advertising performed? Each one of those, one at a time. The remedying of the shortcomings is basically once you understand each of the individual parts, you can see whether they're meeting or matching what our consumers wish or whether we need to do something else. And that falls directly into the second one, number two, which is identify gaps in service outputs desired by the targeted end users. How do our consumers in each of those market segments wish to have their goods delivered to them? That's what this question is asking. And then the last one, which is important, It's important in a very unique way, which most of us may not consider, is that the members in the channels should be profited in an equitable fashion. In other words, there should be an honest day's wage for an honest day's work. And that's what auditing does. It gives us enough understanding about the outputs of each of our individual groups and gives us an understanding of who's being paid what is they should and those that aren't. And so, one, diagnose. Number two, identify gaps. Number three, help members allocate the profits. That number one, the big thing is that you get a detailed knowledge of the capabilities of each of the individual channel members. And that is the benefit of auditing that I kind of want you to know is not only are we delivering, but who's doing the good delivering. That's what we want to know, okay? Remember that marketing channels is a series of interdependent organizations that are acting independently of each other. Each one of these organizations have their own reason for existence besides us. And so the knowledge helps us to understand those members more. Okay, so we are about to walk in on that very busy slide when we were talking about channel functions in chapter one. And so without further ado, let us look at that very busy slide one more time. These are the 9 channel functions that exist within channels. Is this a comprehensive list? The answer that I could say is at the moment, yes. But as we know, Jack Sheth tells us is that marketing is context driven. So as the context of marketing changes, it might change. But for your purposes of doing your test work, these are the 9 you got to worry about, okay? So what we see here is that we're going from left to right. We're talking about the producers at the beginning and the consumers at the end. If it's important to understand that the wholesalers and retailers that you look in here, those are channel intermediaries. And even though there's more than one intermediary, there's still really only 3 members in the system, and that's the manufacturers or the producers or the originators, the intermediaries in the middle, whether they're general or specialized intermediaries, and then finally the consumers at the end, because yes, as all my students well know, consumers perform channel functions. That makes them that's why they're part of the system. All right. So we're going to look at this slide, and then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about them one at a time. But the first thing I want to do is I want you to introduce to the understanding that each function does carry a cost. We can't really ascertain the value that a consumer gets out of a particular item unless we understand the cost that it takes for the consumers to be able to use it. And so with that as an understanding, physical possession, the cost that's represented is storage and then delivery of those goods. Ownership is carrying the inventory for a while, and we'll talk about the dangers of inventory, and we'll talk about it is basically our deal with the devil that we've got to be able to work with. Promotion, of course, is personal selling, advertising, sales promotion, all of those particular items that we all know about when we talk about integrated marketing communications. Negotiation, the cost is the time and the legal aspects of it. Financing, we'll talk about all of these, what they are. Risk is the guarantees or how much we are able to handle. Ordering, payment, and information sharing. So each one of these, you don't have to memorize them, but understand that every function carries a cost. Excuse me. And so let's start talking about them one at a time. So, physical possession are all of the activities pertaining to the storage of goods, which includes the transportation between the channel members It's also the cost of running the warehouses, the transporting of those products back and forth. You should also consider when you're thinking about physical possession, you should think also about product returns as well, because that's also part of it as well. Ownership is all of those activities concerning the transfer of title and the actual owning of it itself. I don't want to use ownership and owning in the same because that's tautological. In other words, you're using a word to define something in its definition, and it's not right. Ownership comes from the taking of the title of those particular goods. Title of the goods means that it is yours. But it is not only the title of the goods, but it is the activities that are both of those together. Okay. So, do physical possession and ownership, as I talked about in chapter one, are they one and the same? And the answer is no, but they usually move together, generally as a rule. Ownership and title, excuse me, and physical possession can be separate. And I've also talked about this is that if you go down King Street and you go to the antique store is basically the owned by the individual who is renting that, but they don't own everything that's inside their store. They are what's known as a consignment shop. And a consignment shop is where you own an item, you put it in a physical space or location. Those people don't own the item, but they allow you to bring that item in so that it can be seen and hopefully ultimately sold. And what happens is that once it's sold, the owner of the store itself takes a little cut and gives the rest back to you. It is a very reasonable arrangement, especially for locations like King Street where the traffic is constant. It might mean up to 30% of the sale, but then again, if you think about it, if I have an armoire, something very special, but I don't have a location to sell it, I mean, it's not unreasonable that I should expect some part of my profit to go into advertising it, and that's exactly what it is. So, just remember the pairing is not universal. It also can be part, you have to think of the reverse channel as well. Um, and it's kind of interesting because online bill pay, you know, they may not even own the data that they do the transactions with. So it's very, very interesting. Now, what happens when both of those move together? Physical possession and ownership. Physical possession and ownership comes up to the concept of what is known as inventory holding cost. Okay? Physical possession plus ownership equals inventory holding cost. Now, when I use the word inventory holding cost, you think to yourself, well, why is something that I own on the other side of the balance sheet? Because that's what a cost is. Well, think about this. And this is one of the more difficult things. As valuable as inventory is, you can't sell consumers nothing that you don't have. The difficulty, however, that with inventory is that it's a drag. In other words, I have to take some of my money and take it and put it into these goods that are stocked on my shelves with the hope, basically, that someone is going to come along and buy those goods. And so that's how I make profit. But as any of you in supply chain will know, as time goes on, the cost of holding inventory as time drags on can be extremely, extremely difficult. All right. Now, I'm going to also come here. Let's see if I can put some notes in here. Yeah. All right. And talk about the concept of turnover, inventory turnover. So, with inventory turnover, let's look at it this way. When the start of January 1st, I happen to have, my apology, folks. On January 1st, I have $1,000 worth of goods on the shelf, and that's cost. Okay. During the year, from January 1 to December 31st, I buy $1,000 of goods. Let's say at the end of the year, I have $1,000 of goods in stock. So, what does this mean? So, if I have $1,000 of goods at the beginning of the year, and I have $1,000 and I sell, or excuse me, buy $1,000 worth of goods by the end of the year, excuse me, I'm sorry, yeah, $1,000 of goods bought, and then at the end of the year I still have $1,000, it means that my inventory turnover rate equals 1. All right. So I start out with $1,000. I buy $1,000 and I end with $1,000. Okay. Now, let's say I start with $1,000 at the beginning of the year. I buy $1,000 during the year, and I have $1,200 of inventory at the end of the year. Sorry, folks, not spelling well. All right. And my inventory ratio, I think, is like 0.87. Let's just not worry about that. I don't expect you to answer this. If somebody would like to type it out, what is the danger? Do you know this? If anyone is in supply chain, what's the problem with having more inventory at the end of the year than at the beginning of the year? Anybody want to throw out a word or just a guess? I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay, what's the problem? Well, it means that you haven't sold all of the stock that you have, which basically means this is you're carrying goods over that you bought in the year from some way or another that you haven't gotten rid of. This is dangerous because things happen with inventory once it's there. You have shrinkage. You could have, especially if those goods are non-durable goods. In other words, those goods are supposed to be totally consumed within a given year. And it's another thing if you're talking about durable goods, let's say you're talking about hammers. Well, a hammer doesn't change. A hammer at the beginning of 2024 is the same as a hammer that starts at the beginning of 2025. Maybe have a little more fancy stuff, who knows, but how fancy can a hammer get? Let's talk about computer memory. So you start the beginning of the year with a terabyte SD card, and then you have a terabyte card at the beginning of the next year. Anybody want to even gamble on how much the price of those items drop over the period of time? It is not unusual, especially in the computer industry, to have things fundamentally change in 6 months or less. And this is the danger of inventory. Even though we have to have it, the unfortunate things is that it is part of the risk that we have to take. So, why do we have inventory in the first place? Well, these are the 4 reasons that you see listed there. The first is that demand surges can very quickly outstrip supply. So, when the Nintendo Wii came out in 2006, and I'm a big Nintendo fan, the Nintendo was about 6 months away from bankruptcy at that time. Now, I can remember I was working in computers and IT at the time, and I can remember that they talked 18 months before the Wii was announced that Nintendo was coming up with a new kinetic form of interaction beyond just merely the standard joysticks. And everybody needed to watch out. Well, here comes the Wii. the we for 4 years, I think maybe even five, from the moment November to December, generally most stores were out of the we before you ever hit Thanksgiving. And so that's one of the difficulties is demand quite simply can outstrip supply so fast that you don't have time to compensate. And so what do we do? Well, what we do is we have this little thing at the bottom that's called a safety stock or a safety supply. And what a safety stock is, or a safety supply, is the best estimate that is what is going to be needed in an order cycle. How do we make those choices and how do we come up with that? Well, basically, what it comes down to is the best guess. All right. It is usually benefited or supported by some really deep analytics, but can anybody even come up with how do we calculate a once in a lifetime event like the COVID in 2020, and the impact before and after. And that's one of those particular things that got Starbucks in such hot water, excuse me, is that consumers changed fundamentally the way they wanted their goods delivered. And once again, I'll save that for later. So we have a safety stock. We do the best we can, but sometimes it doesn't work right. Okay? All right. So we have inventory because demand surges can outstrip supply. The other is quite simply is that the economies of scale, that it is more advantageous to us in terms of price to build 5,000 an item based or instead of 2,000. But if we are going to make such a choice, we have to be able to have very substantial information that backs up the reasons that we're going to do that. The next is transportation takes time. And we're going through one of those things right now where transportation is once again up in the air. We have had UPS and we've had the United States Postal Service now start interacting between each others, and one is doing the functions of one versus the other. One of the great advantages of the Postal Service is it is a last mile 4PL corporation that has been in place for 200 years, or as long as the Republic has been here. That's to its advantage. I don't know if you know this as well, is that along with the transportation, there are over 7,500 4GPLs out there that do all of those particular functions. I think there's 5,000 that FedEx contracts alone, quite simply because they can't get all of it done. So transportation takes time, and the number of partners, depending on the demand, can grow. And then the last thing that goes along with the top one is that supply and demand are uncertain. We try to make our best estimates, but we just don't know. And so those are the difficulties and the disadvantages of physical possession. And yet we're in business not to sell. Well, we're in business to be able to provide consumers with what they desire. And remember that in channels, we're trying to get it to them at the exact moments and the exact sizes in which they wish. Okay? Any questions so far? We're all good. All right. So, next up is promotion. And of course, we don't have to have much discussion about promotion. It is all of those activities that seek to increase the awareness of the product, which usually is focused on targeting new buyers. But the interesting thing about that also is promotion can be targeting new buyers with products that are pre-existing, that have already been pre-owned, and that consumers many times will take products that are just as valued that have been refurbished. So I guess what this basically means is that you hope to seek to be able to increase awareness of your products and the knowledge that it has so that consumers can make good decisions and they are satisfied afterwards. Okay. So negotiation is present in the channel, especially if the terms of the sale or the persistence of the relationships are always open for negotiation. So, one of the things that is the bedrock of business now is the ability to fix a price and have the confidence that price is always going to be there. Well, that is a trade-off, but you also might want to find is that the time to conduct the negotiations is easier, and why that's why you want to fix those particular prices. But maybe perhaps negotiation will allow you to bargain to a better price. But as I said before, negotiation, like all of the channel functions, come with a cost. What's the cost of legal counsel? What is the cost of conducting the negotiations? All of those things have to be taken into account before you can determine whether or not you're willing to constantly shift prices around. So, financing. Okay, so can anyone guess what that little thing right there means? You got your 5 seconds. Okay, that means 210 net 30. And what does it mean? It means that if you, as a client, after you're billed for a particular service, pays that within 10 days, you can give yourself a 2% discount. If you don't pay within 10 days, it means that the balance needs to be paid within 30. If you are Walmart, you can ask, or excuse me, and you have vendors to pay, Walmart negotiates net 45. Now, why is that so important? All right. Why is that so valued? Well, financing are all of the costs that are inherent to any sale when a good is moved from one level of the channel to the other, all the way to the end user. But I want you to consider this, and I want you to understand why net 30 is so valuable. What it means is that this it is a an understanding of the seller's willingness to finance the buyer's purchase over a period of time after the product has been delivered. The seller accepts the financial cost of the foregone income for those 30 days and allows you to take that money and finance it in whatever way you want. Now, you might say to yourself, 30 days. I mean, how much can that make a difference in? Well, as I said before, Walmart is net 45. So Walmart, who has bills to pay in the billions, if it has 15 days to float around and play with 10 to 15 billion just on just the minor amounts of APY that they will get in that 15 days when we're talking about 20 billion, what if it's 100,000? That's a lot of money, no matter which way you take it. And that's all in just merely delaying the purchase. And so financing are those costs, but it's also a real big expression of trust that you have in your trading partner. You can be done by the manufacturers, you can have outside specialists, but financing in and of itself is one of those amazing things that happens in business. And the willingness to be able to let you play with that money is a big expression of trust. Now, along with financing comes the risk. Risks are any uncertainties in the channel solutions. Usually what you will see is to mitigate risk is you'll see long-term contracts between end users and distributors. And what you might see is that you will lock in a certain price for a given time. And the main reason is that as you hedge against inflations or stagnations, okay? The concept of hedging means is that you're willing to accept a certain amount of risk so that you can avoid or be able to gain, let's just say, gain a little bit more money in the transaction. So, risk also includes warranties, it includes insurances, it can insure sales and service, and the hedging in a very particular way. Hedging means price guarantees to hold inventory at certain costs, and that's what hedging is. So, let me give you an example of where hedging is big in given industries. Excuse me. All right. So, two organizations, two airlines, one Southwest airline, one Delta airline. It is amazing these two particular airlines in the way that they particular do their jobs, especially in the ways or the structures in which they organize themselves and the types of airframes that they have. So an airframe is basically a different type of jet. Every jet has is what is called an airframe. So Delta Airlines, as of last count, through mergers and acquisitions, have 29 different airframes. Those are the different size and style jets and planes, propeller planes, that they have in their inventory. Now, I want you to think about that. Just think about that in terms of risk and also thinking of financing and all the rest of the things. 29 different airframes. The advantages are Delta can fly anywhere in the world. They can use their Airbuses, and even they don't have a 380s, but they have other larger ones. They have Airbus 350s. They have 777s, Boeings. They have the 787 Dreamliners. They have the 747s, but they even have the small Embarcadero 70 passenger jets as well, and even down to the 12 individuals in a plane. But they contract those. Anyway, just think about all of that. Just think of the expense of having 29 different sets of tools and parts for 29 different sets of airframes. It could be very confusing and very expensive. The other part of that about Delta is, you know, being able to do the training for all of those at the same time. So, Southwest Airlines, how many airframes they have? They have one. All right. They have one, the 737. That is their particular item. Okay. Excuse me. And they use that. Now, the difficulty with that is, of course, is that that for having one airframe, it means basically that you're limited to that type of planes, abilities, and limitations. Okay, and so what that means is that whatever is, excuse me, what, whatever is the range of the 737 is in essence its entire its entire excuse me, I'm sorry, its entire routing structure. Now, what you need to know about the seventh, or excuse me, is Southwest Airlines is it started basically as a commuter routes between the cities of Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. It was those three, and so they used the 737. Well, what they found out is that they could still be able to go to other locations, and that's how you started to see Southwest spread across the United States. They're spread into South America. However, realize this, is that the 737 is limited to overseas travel. They can't do it. Now, they can fly to Hawaii because that's within the distance, and they were about to, but unfortunately, the 737 MAX had its issues, and so that was put off quite a bit. All right. So the 737, however, gives them a great advantage because they only have one set of tools. They only have one manual that they have to deal with, and it allows their particular pilots to standardize on 737s and move from plane to plane. All right, so going through all of that, understanding the differences between Southwest and Delta, hedging is one of those things that you do when it comes to securing fuel. So what that means is that do I have enough fuel to fly my planes? Southwest is willing to bet on the existing market and they buy at timing rates so that they're able to save as much money as they can at any moment. And so the way they do it is they use hedging to protect themselves against rising energy costs. They do it, and it's almost an art with them. All right. So it allows them to protect against the fuel prices. With lower fuel costs, it means that Southwest can take that money instead of investing in fuel and use it to buy new aircraft or improve their operations. And then that last part is that it helps Southwest to be profitable. They hedge on at least 50% of their fuel costs, which means that they're willing to bet on having to buy fuel in the open market. Now, have they done well? Well, you can look at it here. Southwest, their traders, which are very super specialized people within their organization, hedged and saved Southwest $1.2 billion. And just think of that. That's just saving money just by being smart in your business. Great stuff. Delta, however, they don't have that magic. Delta, for some reason, really has difficulty with it. And this is in 2016, where they basically said they took a bath on it. All right, instead of locking in their prices. Now, here is the thing: where Southwest is willing to bid to over half, Delta doesn't has even at their max. It's only 1/3 of their overall fuel, where Southwest gained 1.2 billion in an advantage. Delta lost 4 billion. Okay, even though they're very much willing to bank on 2/3 of their fuel and get the remaining 1/3. There's just some corporations that are better at it than other. So how does Delta cure this problem? Well, what Delta did is they bought a refinery. Okay. So in 2016, 27, no, that's right. Yeah, no, 2017, Delta went out and bought a refinery in Philadelphia. And did they do well? They're doing great. All right. They're able to save, let's see, where is this in there? They've been able to, act as a hedge against their prices, and they generated $1 billion in revenue from the refinery that they own themselves. And so this is an example of how corporations can manage risk built within the structures of those companies. Can anybody do it? No. You got to be able, oh, what's the word I want to have? You have to have an expertise at that. It's a very specialized ability. Buyers and organizations, the purchasing agents, the good ones are gold to any organization. Dollar General, by the way, we had a buyer come in 2 years ago. I wish I could see him again, but he came in and explained how they do it and how they maximize theirs. And they do the same way. They buy inventory on the spot markets and shave those percentages down to the bare minimums. Buyers you know, are literally success or failure with any organization. So moving on, we'll talk about ordering and payment. ordering and payment, or all of those costs that are incurred. Um, that includes, the cost of, constantly buying those goods again and again. You find now that automatic replenishment systems are pretty much the vogue in organizations, especially in organizations when that are standardized kinds of placing of orders that stay consistent, and there's no reason to have an individual interacting in the middle of that. And so automatic replenishment systems, they send a replenishment order automatically when stocks reach a certain minimum level, and they're returned. And so that's how ordering and payment systems work now. The last is information sharing. I want to kind of you to think about this. If I don't have a certainty of success in buying an item, many times I will refrain from it. Or if I'm in a big fear, I may buy an enormous amount. And unfortunately, when things do not pan out, I'm stuck with an inventory that I can't do anything about. Toys R Us, which was under financial constraints in the 2010s, ultimately, when they bought the, let's see, what is it, the Last Jedi stocks, when they bought those and stocked their shelves, that was ultimately the one thing that dragged Toys R Us into permanent bankruptcy. They did not have enough valued information on the sales trends, and it eventually pulled them over. That there's a saying when we talk about this in a concept, what you're saying is you're transforming inventory into information, which means is that the greater knowledge that you have, the less chance you're going to invest in inventory that is unlikely to help you succeed. And so information sharing, once again, as a service output and then as a function, as I've said before, if you come up with a concept that says the most important information is sharing is there. All right, so we're going to finish with that. And there's one more statement that I'm going to type out, and I'm going to want you to understand this. So let me get set here. I want you to see what I'm typing, and I'm going to want you to kind of understand what I'm writing. Okay. The costs associated with performing channel functions demand, and I want to emphasize that word, demand, that channels avoid performing, and here comes that strange one, unnecessarily well. Now, what I'm saying there is that given the cost for a particular item and the costs that are generally performed in the function of any business, what it means is that you must have exactly what you need at the exact moment. You want the exact service levels at the lowest cost. Now, for marketing people to talk about costs, I got to go wash out my mouth because we're not worried about costs. What we're worried about is value. That's at least what Dr. Babin told me back in marketing theory. But this I want you to absorb again, and I want you to think about the things that we talked about. The costs associated with performing those functions demand that the channels avoid performing unnecessarily well. And what that means is it's not about exceeding expectations, but what it means is delivering exactly what the consumer wants. Now, it also can be a little bit extra. That's not what it means, but we want to be able to avoid doing more than we need because sometimes the services that we provide, consumers don't want. And if we're providing them things they don't want, that means we're wasting the money we're spending and we're also not completely listening to the customer. All right. So those are the channel functions. Where am I? There I am. Okay.
Do you
So,
mind to go back on that Google Note?
sure. Hold on.
Thank you.
Right there. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
You're sure. You're welcome. Yeah. So, I mean, I just want you to think about this. I mean, um, what you're going to be going through, especially for a long time, is you're going to do your very best to perform up to your expectations. And the difficulty when I say unnecessarily well is that we're not that we don't want to provide things for the consumer, but if the consumer doesn't want what we're asking to give them, then we're wasting resources in giving them performance of what they really want. We're going to talk in the next couple of days and next week. We're going to talk about what went through the music industry and all of the major changes that went through there as well, in that we had wonderful services originally when I was growing up, and we had music delivered in a way that was satisfactory to our generation. But when compact discs came along, we actually did not perform in the way that consumers desired. Um, and it was a fundamental shift in the way that consumers wanted to buy things. One of the advantages, and we'll talk about this later, is you could buy just one record, or excuse me, one song. When I was, in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up. When the 80s came along, unfortunately, compact disc came and you couldn't buy it just a single. And yet consumers demanded that. And so compact disc performed unnecessarily well, but the difficulty also is that they missed the market that they were looking for. Okay? Were you able to get all the notes you needed? All good? Okay. I'm going to say all good. So let's move off and move on. Okay. So some rules of thumb that it's important for us to recognize as we go along with that unnecessarily well. Remember this: specific channel members can specialize in one or more specific channel functions. You can have a transportation company that will move, store, and deliver your goods. They specialize on that one particular item. You could have a company that is both good at finance and risk at the same time, and that they are valued in there, and that can be done as well. Or you can have a channel member that's good at everything, whatever creates value. The next thing, one other rule is, and I've said this before, and now you put this in your mind, you can remove a member from the channel, but whatever the functions they are, whatever they performed, cannot be eliminated. You can eliminate the member, you cannot remove the function. After a channel member leaves the channel, the functions must shift to some other channel member. Now, there are some minor exceptions, but as far as your tests, no, you don't have to worry about them. Okay. The one thing that you do want to do is avoid redundancy. You don't want to have one salesperson that's calling on a corporation and an independent sales rep who's calling on those same people at the same time. We'll talk about dual distribution in chapter 4. But dual distribution has that disadvantage as the manufacturer sells to me as a retailer, and as a retailer, I sell that good, but then also that manufacturer can sell directly to the consumer, and we have some difficulties because you're the goods at the same time I am. And so sometimes those channel functions can be at odds with each other. So these are the basic rules for channel functions. Remember this is that every channel function contributes to the production of those valued service outputs. And remember, it produces cost. And those costs either have to be accepted by the consumer or they have to be compensated in one way or another. And so for physical possession, it is all the activities that are pertaining to the storage of goods and the transportation between the channel members. And it can be even taking outright ownership of those goods if they have to. Physical possession cost are the running of the warehouses, the transporting of the products. It is the paying for the warehouse workers. It is all of those costs that are associated with the physical possession. I want you to understand all of those and realize sometimes that the cost of maintaining and storing and keeping those goods sometimes can be prohibitive. And so remember, whenever you're thinking about providing some unique channel function, remember that each one of those comes for a cost, and your consumers may not necessarily value what the costs are, and maybe quite simply too much. Okay, I think we're at an excellent point to stop here. So when we come into class on Tuesday, we're going to talk about the efficiency template. As I've said before, we're going to take the efficiency template off the table. It will not be for the test, but you will have to know what the efficiency table is, its functions, and its primary purpose. Okay. Okay, folks. Well, look, we're ready to go out on a very miserable day. So I hope you all have a great afternoon. I will be posting these videos in the next couple of hours. Let's see. And when will the test be? That's a very good question. I do not plan on the test to be next week because I think there needs to be a lot of catch up. And so my best guesstimate for the test will be the 18th of February, okay? And you'll see it reflected on As You Learn.
Will we have like a review session with you before the test?
Very briefly at on February 13th, we'll talk briefly about that. Yes, we will. And you're very welcome, Jake. No worries, okay? Any other questions? I'll also talk to you about how I do my tests, which are, you know, very basic. I do 30 questions, multiple guess from each one of the chapters. My multiple guess questions are basically broke down into easy questions, which is basically answering a definition like what is channels, all right? The second is would be those examples of I'm doing this. Um, this is an example of what like service. I'm taking these goods and making them into smaller pieces, and this is an example of breaking bulk. That would be the second kind of question. And the third is would be an analytical kind of question where you'd be talking about something, and then you would have to take the best answer out of multiple alternatives. Now, I'm pretty bad at multiple guess questions. I'll be totally honest. You'll also have usually 5 to 6 essay questions worth 10 points apiece, and you'll be able to choose 4 out of those 5 or 6 essay questions to be asked. So I'm telling you to expect something on the structure of channels and why is the consumer in the channel structure. I mean, that is inherent and basic in your understanding, and I consider it so important that I'm willing to tell you before beginning just so you get it, okay? And then I'll probably have maybe a few bonus questions at the end. So we're talking 100 points out of a possible 104 total, okay? Okay, well, good questions. I hope you all have an excellent weekend. You'll see my posting of the videos up by the end of the day, and I will see you in class on Tuesday. Okay? All right, one more question. Thank you very much, too, Lauren. Go have a good weekend. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you later. Okay? Bye bye. Lauren, I'll check your email. Okay? I will email you and I will go look for it. Okay?